Hello everyone and welcome to the Student Art Podcast. I'm your host Ross Baxter and today is episode 65 of the show. The Student Art Podcast is a weekly series where I bring on guests from the film and game industries to talk about their journey and thoughts on student education. The podcast is live on 11 other platforms such as Anchor, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Breaker, Overcast, Google Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Radio Public, Stitcher, and last but not least we've got YouTube. If you guys are tuning in on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe, smash the like button, and as always, turn on notifications to be notified every single week when the podcast is live. So the Student Art Podcast is sponsored by The Rookies. There is simply no better way to launch your career and start sharing your amazing work online. Throughout their website, you can create your own portfolio, enter lots of contests that take place all year round, and has an incredible community for non-professional digital artists. From hobbyists, students, self-taught artists, to even people wanting to make a career change, the Rookies community brings everyone together, allowing you to be surrounded by people on the same journey as you. So if you want to showcase your portfolio, grow as an artist, and track your progress, sign up to the Rookies today. But with all that said, today on the show we've got an incredible artist. We've got Sonja Christoph on the show. Thanks so much for coming on. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Anytime. It means a lot having you on. And first things first, as always, most important part is the guest. So we all, as always, folks, make sure to give Sonja a follow on her social medias. You'll see her Instagram, her ArtStation on the screen right now if you're tuning in on YouTube. And as always, links are in the description below. So as always, first things first, just tell us a wee bit about yourself. What got you into art, and we'll just start off from there.
My road is it's a bit long, so I'll try to sum it up because I didn't start off as an artist. I sort of got to it later on in my career.
Okay.
I actually started off working in production first. So, I mean, obviously I always I always liked doing art. That was, I always enjoyed drawing, but I wasn't quite sure whether I would be, good enough to actually have a full-time job in it. Mm-hmm. So when I first went to college, I started to discover sort of my love for photography. And I'm like, I felt like, this is something I can really wrap my hands around and really get going. So I actually majored in photography.
Awesome. Wow.
And that then led me to discover film. Mm-hmm. I started taking, for my major, I had to take some introductory classes. And I took a couple of classes there, and that's when I realized, like, there are so many jobs in the film industry.
Yeah.
And it's just overwhelming. I had no idea before, Hollywood is sort of like this weird, magical machine.
Yeah.
You don't really know how movies are actually being made. At least, I didn't.
Yep.
So I took a couple classes in that, and then I just fell in love with it. And I'm like, all right, this is what I want to do. I'm gonna work in film. Mm-hmm. So I went to film school. That's how I got started.
Because you started off first in University of Miami. First, that's where everything kicked off.
Yes.
And then you also do teaching as well in CGMA. And then like you said, you worked in film. You've worked in games. You've also worked in VR. And then to top off, you've also done roller coasters.
Yes. And TV and commercials.
And TV commercials. So awesome. So
yeah.
Everyone who's listening, you're going to be in for a ride for this because there's so much great content in today's episode with Sonja on the show. There's going to be so much things that we can talk about. So obviously this is the thing. So what would you describe yourself more as now? Because obviously you're a senior environment artist at Massive. Would you say that's how you describe yourself?
No, honestly, I think I'm just, because like you said, I've done so much, and I do like to ping back and forth between different industries.
Yeah.
So honestly, I've just decided to call myself, I'm just a 3D generalist and a matte painter. That sort of covers the realm of everything. That's what I stick to now.
Perfect. So, as always on the Student Art Podcast, as everyone's aware, we always like to talk about student education, and then obviously bring in Sonja's background and her expertise, etc., into the discussion. So first things first, I actually wanted to kind of actually go into since the fact that you've done so much, I actually wanted to start off with a bit of a random one, and that's traveling and doing different things. And I just wanted to hear your journey and your experience of just basically traveling around doing different jobs. Like, how's like the journey been? Because I understand, like things obviously change all the time. I just want to hear your perspective on change.
I think change is important. I know it can be very scary for a lot of people, but I think a little bit of scary is good, and I think change is good. You know, it pushes you out of your comfort zone. You experience different cultures, you see different things. You know, you experience different values, different perspectives, and I think especially as an artist, that is so important to what we do and what we try to capture and what we try to convey through our art. So, you know, I think traveling and changing is incredibly important. You know, even if you also just think about, if you just look at this amount of software, you know, the new software comes out every day, new techniques come out every day. You know, as an artist, if you don't keep up with that change, you're going to become irrelevant really quickly. So I think especially being in the entertainment industry, being in the tech industry, I think change is something we just need to embrace.
Of course. So do you like, so obviously you've done film and games and so forth. Is there anything that mainly stood out to you that's like the big difference between the two?
There are a lot of differences. I think one of the bigger ones is probably just the sheer length of projects. Okay. Now obviously that can change depending on what kind of game you work on. But from what I've experienced so far is that generally games take a lot longer than a film, or obviously even shorter with TV and even shorter with commercials. So I think just, you know, it's something that you kind of, you know, it's something you need to sort of get used to and wrap your head around. You're going to be working on this one IP for, you know, over a year. So, you know, and usually coming from film, you know, where, like I said, a commercial can be a couple days to maybe a couple weeks, to TV show, which can be, you know, a new episode comes out every 8 days, or, you know, every 7 days. So film, if you're lucky, if you're on the entire show, you know, some films you can work on a film for maybe a year, ballpark wise. So it's a very different pace.
Yeah. Because like that's one of the things as well. So everyone who's tuning in as well, Sonja's done a lot of great talks from Gnomon, etc. And throughout these talks, one of the main things that I learned, especially when she was talking at Gnomon, was being able to adapt. And it'd be great to hear, like, what's your thought process, or what's your thoughts on being able to adapt to certain situations? Because I understand, especially in film, because film's one thing that I have a massive passion for, and obviously I understand that sometimes you get put in situations that you have to obviously learn something new, or sometimes you get thrown a task that maybe you didn't expect. What's your thoughts on just adapting to situations?
It's, I think, probably my career success.
Yeah, perfect.
I think it's because honestly, you know, especially with films, or also with games, it's the same thing. You know, I think it's a human, it's a human trait that we try to push ourselves to do something new. We want to discover something new. We want to, you know, do the best product. We want to do something that nobody's ever done before. And that means that you need to be able to figure out how to do that. And you need to be able to be, you know, you need to be able to adapt to that situation. And you need to also be okay with sort of saying, you know, all right, I have no idea how I'm going to do this, but I'll figure it out. I'll be all right. Yeah. You know, so you kind of need to be able to adapt with it and just roll with the punches, because things change. Things can change on a daily basis. You know, you try one thing, it doesn't work out. All right, what's the other thing you can do? And to be fair, I think that's actually something I learned from working in production before it had anything to do with art. Because, you know, before I worked in, I used to work in Hollywood on set, and I was an assistant director back then.
That's so incredible.
And a job of an assistant director is basically, you know, you run the set. You know, you do the schedule, you make sure everybody's where they're supposed to be, you talk to the director, make sure they have everything they need. So you're really kind of the glue between all the departments, and, you know, stuff always goes wrong. I mean,
Yeah.
always. You know, it can be raining when you need sunshine. It can be sunshine when you need rain. I mean, you know, things always happen,
Yeah.
and that you can't control. So you have to be able to figure out, okay, well, what else can we do? So you're constantly thinking about plan B and plan C. And I think that's something that I've carried over into my career now. And it's been incredibly beneficial.
Awesome. So like when it came to like just speaking on the topic of being an assistant director, so like what did you work on? It'd be great to hear.
Oh God. So I worked my way up. So, you know, I started on the very bottom. I was a production assistant.
Okay.
I'm great at taking coffee orders, I'll tell you that. And then I worked my way up. I got into the assistant director training program, which is a sponsored program by the Producers Guild and the Directors Guild. And they accept about 14 to 17 people every year, I think.
Right.
It's a pretty tough challenge. I failed miserably the first time I tried, but the second time I got in.
Awesome.
And then I worked my way. You know, I graduated, got into the union, and all that stuff. So that was a long process. But I worked on Too Fast, Too Furious, Timeline, Dodgeball, Collateral. What else? I did several seasons of ER. That was a lot of fun.
Wow.
Criminal Minds. Did you do Criminal Minds? No, I did CSI New York. It's a lot.
The list just goes on and on.
Yeah, you jump around quite a bit.
Because like that's the great thing, because and I say it pretty much like literally almost every podcast is like everybody who comes on the podcast, like you don't know what to expect because everyone's story is completely different, and like every job's different. You have no idea what's going to happen. Things change, like you said. When it came to like adapting, etc., things are evolving all the time, and like that's the great thing about it. Because like at the end of the day, we don't know where we're going to end up in 5 years' time, 10 years' time. Obviously, we have like a goal in mind. Like we have like our passions, whether it's concept art, environment art, character art, you name it, whatever it is. But the great thing is like just roll with it, see where things take you. You never know. Like things obviously like change all the time, and but that's part of the beauty of this journey that you're going on. And like this is a great thing about what Sonja's done, is like she's done so many different things. And I remember in one of your talks that you were saying was one of the things that inspired you to move over into visual effects was the film 2012.
Yeah. Yes.
And it'd be great to hear about just like what kind of to hear about that kind of side of things, like getting into film.
Yeah, so it was actually it was in 2008.
Mm-hmm.
The Writers Guild decided to go on a strike.
Okay.
So that meant that we were all pretty much unemployed for several months, and you know, I had nothing to do at the time. I was quite bored, admittedly. And you know, like I said, there's only so much yoga you can do, and I'm not very good at it. So there was a presentation at the Directors Guild about the VFX on 2012 and Star Trek, and I was like, all right, you know, got nothing better to do. Let's go check it out. I'm curious, anyways. You know, because at the time, I have to admit, I had no idea. I didn't know anything about VFX, how it's being made. I know how to shoot a great green screen, but that was about my extent of knowledge on it.
Yeah.
So I saw the presentation, and I saw the breakdown of the Santa Monica earthquake, and that just blew my mind. Like
Same.
It was just incredible. And I just, you know, like I said, I had never seen this before, and just seeing like how far, you know, just computer graphics had come, and because I had no idea how they had done it, and seeing how they did it and hearing them talk about it, I'm like, that is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I was just like, okay, I want to know how to do this. You know, I have nothing better to do anyways, so I might as well take a couple classes. So I asked a couple of my, you know, VFX supervisors that I knew, and they all sort of recommended Gnomon in LA.
Perfect.
So I was like, all right, I'll check it out. I went to an open house. And I'm like, oh, this looks really cool. This is like, you know, really nice people and like the really cool, you know, setup. Awesome, interesting classes. I'm like, all right, I'm just going to sign up, take a couple classes. And before I knew it, I just fell in love with it. and I was like, I want to do this. I want to do this for a living.
Yeah.
Yeah, so then I'm about to age myself, but at 29, at age 29, I decided to go back to school full time. So I did.
That's awesome, because that's the thing as well. That's like when it comes to once again, one of the main questions that a lot of people ask is like, when should I go back? Like, is it too late going back to education? But it's never too late. It doesn't matter. It's like, I'm sure you've realized yourself, through all the people you've met in the industry, is that like there's like an age range of so many years. Like, everyone's coming from all different backgrounds, and it's never too late to figure out what you want to do. And like, that's the thing, and I'll repeat it every time until everyone actually pursues it. No matter how many times I say this podcast, just keep going at it, because it's never too late. And but like, that's the thing as well, is like, obviously like, Gnomon, it's a great school, and I would have loved to go to Gnomon. So I live in Scotland. I went to a great place. So there's nothing wrong with my education. I absolutely loved it. I was spoilt rotten going there. However, just like speaking about Gnomon, like, tell us a wee bit about the course. Like, so what happened when you were at Gnomon?
So Gnomon, at the time, their curriculum has changed from my understanding, as now I think, it's grown, they're now accredited as well.
Yeah.
But at the time they didn't have any of that. So they had, if I remember correctly, I think they had 4 different tracks that you could take, and I sort of decided early on that I wanted to become a map painter.
Okay.
That was sort of, I just loved the efficiency of it, the sneakiness and the cheating. I thought it was great.
Totally.
But they didn't really have a track for that. So I decided to just go with the Generalist track, because I thought that was a good, round overall general education. I'd learned a little bit of everything, and I felt there was enough room that I could sort of, sneak in matte paintings wherever I could, which I did.
Awesome. You got to.
Yeah, make a twister or make a tornado. All right, I'll put a destroyed gas station in there. It'll be great. Stuff like that. So that's what I did, and it was 6 classes every 10 weeks, so every term, and it was it was a lot of work.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, again, I started with my Intro to Maya class. That was the first time I ever heard what a polygon was.
Right.
And I had no idea what they were talking. I was just, what?
That's where it all kicked off. The
Yeah,
world
exactly.
of polygons, so much stuff going on.
Oh my gosh, I had no idea. And then Nurbs, let's not talk about Nurbs, like everything.
That's a scary world. I'll never go down the world of Nurbs.
I had one class, and that was challenging.
Does it still even get used in the industry? I've never heard of Nurbs being used in ages. Like, do they still get used?
The car industry. Oh,
Car
yeah.
industry, right? Okay, right.
Oh, yeah, it's huge. Yeah, I bet Rhino is very good for it.
Right, awesome. I didn't even know that. Learn something every day. That's the best thing about doing podcasts.
Yeah. No, it's very. I mean, it's great. I mean, honestly, Nurbs does have a lot of advantages. And I haven't tried it yet, but from my understanding, Rhino is fantastic with it. So
Okay.
It's definitely handy. Yeah.
So if anyone's wanting to check out Nurbs, check out Rhino and give it a go. You never know. So
Yeah.
As always, when it comes to the podcast, obviously, like, student education is like the go-to thing, and like there's so many great things about obviously Gnomon and all the schools. Like, obviously, there's lots of different places to learn, and it's all down to obviously doing the research first. But one of the main questions I like to ask when it comes to obviously the podcast is like, is there anything, like, obviously you've done map painting, you've done environment art, you name it, you've done it all. Is there anything that through all your years' experience is like the main thing that kind of stands out that you wish you learned through all of your time through work?
Through work, not so much. I wish. So now I'm in a situation where I wish I would have paid more attention in rigging.
Okay.
And that's all my own fault, I have to admit, because I sort of thought I would never use that, and now I'm like, oh, that would be nice to know.
Right.
Shoot. Should have paid attention, and I didn't. So that's kind of biting me in the butt right now. Yeah, and that's only because I think as you keep doing things, you just you want to branch out, you want to learn more, you want to do different things. So every once in a while, it's kind of nice to have a character in your scene. Mm-hmm. It's kind of nice to also maybe potentially animate the character, but for that you need to rig it.
Yeah.
So. That's the one thing that I wish I would have paid a little bit more attention to.
Back to the rigging.
Yeah, because as soon as I put the IK, in there, then it all just, it's a mess. So Yeah, rigging.
Awesome. Because like that's the thing as well. So like when it comes to obviously student education, like a lot of common things come up in terms of like what do you wish you learned basically, and people always say obviously maybe more industry pipeline, which I completely understand, but then again it's about getting like the right balance of understanding that education is obviously it's always a difficult one because it's trying to figure out, right, am I getting taught the right information to prepare me for the industry, but then again you're also trying to figure out what your passion is within the time frame that you're studying. And it's always been a like one of the main discussions that I've always talked about on the podcast, and I understand that it's like there's no kind of final answer for a lot of the questions, but there's a lot of things through every guest that I have on that like they're able to give like insight to like things to try out, things to experiment. And to carry on this topic of like the education side of things, one of the main questions I would like to ask is like, is there anything that like when it comes to like the game side of things that you would say is like a must for people to learn, and then also the same thing for film? Is there anything that kind of stands out to you?
Yeah, I kind of want to actually elaborate on that a little bit as well, because I get the question also a lot, like what software should I learn and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm always that's why I'm like, you know what, don't focus so much on the software. Just focus on the principles. Understand the principles behind what's good topology. Like those kind of things. What's good art. Understand those principles and those fundamentals, because depending on the studio you might go to, there's going to be different software. There will be different game engines. There will be things will get thrown at you that you just don't know, that you haven't worked with before, and that's okay. Just as long as you, and honestly, they all, whether it's 3ds Max, Modo, Blender, Maya, whatever you use, they all work essentially in a similar way. So as long as you understand one of them and you're willing to learn the others, you'll be fine and it'll be okay. Just be prepared and be open-minded, and don't try to fixate too much on learning this one software, and don't freak out when you hear that a studio is using a different software.
Yeah.
It'll be okay. As long as you understand again what good topology is, you'll be fine. It might take a little bit of time to get to know the other software, but it'll be all right. You've done it once, you can do it again. So it's just, I think just trying to get away from that mindset that, oh my gosh, I don't know how to work in Maya, I cannot apply there. No, that's absolutely not the case. You can. So that's just like one of the things that I get asked so many times that I'm like, don't worry about it. Unless you're specifically a Houdini artist, then yes, you do need to know Houdini. That's like probably the one exception I would say in the industry as of now, where you kind of need to focus on.
Like that's the thing as well, because when it came to how can I say it, like every student that has ever like put a comment in the podcast or on YouTube, etc., or just through Twitter questions, etc., the discussion always comes up like what are the differences? Like I understand that like, obviously the software is different, and that what we talked about earlier about like the deadlines change, like the way things are planned. Obviously when it comes to a game, you obviously have maybe a year or 2 years depending on the studio and depending on the workload, etc. Whereas working in TV shows, you've like you said, an episode, I don't know, obviously like I'm not an expert, I have no knowledge when it comes to like the film side of things in regards to TV, but like there's so many different things that students are trying to figure out, like what's the right way. But at the end of the day though, you have to realize that you learn a lot of things on the job, and like Sonja is saying, when it comes to the whole software discussion, studios teach you. However, there is some cases, and I remember one of your talks that you were saying as well, that sometimes you get thrown into the deep end and you just have to learn a software on your own. And it'd be actually great to kind of hear your perspective on that in terms of learning to kind of adjust to like difficult situations.
Yeah, I mean that was that was at ILM when we had to do our apprenticeship using 3ds Max, which at that point I had opened once and quickly closed. So,
terrified instantly.
Terrified. I had no idea where anything was. So yeah, so that was that was the first shocker. But it's, I don't know. I think at that point, maybe competitiveness, maybe just maybe just wanting to grow to the challenge, like that sort of mentality, I think just sort of kicks in. Mm-hmm. Also, probably not wanting to ask, the people around you who are just amazing and or at the time they were working on Transformers. So, I mean, I had never seen so many polygons on a screen at a single. So like it just felt wrong to ask them where the material editor was.
Right, okay.
It just felt really wrong. It's like, it's like a little bit of pride probably kicked in there as well. Not wanting to do that, not wanting to look like a complete, beginner.
But did you get comfortable though? I assume you got into a habit of like asking people and trying to figure out how to kind of learn things.
I picked my questions very carefully. And I think before I asked the question, I just made sure that I couldn't answer the question myself first.
Right, okay. That's a really good way to answer that. No, that's the first time. Wait, why have I never mentioned this in the pod? That's a great answer. Thanks for saying that.
Yeah.
Picking your questions carefully. No, that's really smart. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I'll let you continue.
No, I mean that was basically it. It's just like like when I didn't know how to do something, yeah. I'm like, all right, maybe Google it first. Find out if I can get some information online.
Yeah.
And if I really couldn't get the answer, then I would ask.
Perfect, because that's the thing. Because I have a habit, and I did it for many years. I'll still admit I'm still kind of a culprit of it. Like I ask a lot of questions, and I've always said to everyone on the podcast, it's the most common thing that you should be doing in terms of, obviously it's the only way you get results. But obviously when it comes to the industry, and basically just talking about what you just said there, is that obviously you want to show that you can learn on your own and be independent. And I understand that obviously when you first start out, it can be quite daunting because there's so much things going on, and the pressure might get to you. It's completely natural. It's normal. It's okay. But it's always good to, like, even when it comes to social networking and getting to know people, when it comes to like starting that first conversation or starting like trying to ask the right questions, be prepared, figure out the right things to ask, take your time, and like Sonja was saying, like look into it first. Like maybe it's just a quick Google search, maybe it's just maybe the person sitting next to you might use the people around you, but always be smart, because like that's one thing. Like it's obviously great to show you're passionate, but showing to the people that you're working with that you're able to do things on your own, it goes such a long way. I don't think I've just ever really, like, I've done 65 podcasts now. I don't know why I've never really gone into that. That's great to discuss on. So one of the next things I want to talk about is like online learning. So I always like to talk about like the best things for students to learn. And obviously you've covered so many different areas. Is there anything that's kind of stood out to you over the years that's helped you for like map painting specifically, and also like environment art? Is anything going to be like your go-to source?
Go-to source. I think. I mean, the amazing thing is that there's so many sources available now. Mm-hmm. That even weren't available like just like 5 years ago. It's more and more seem to be popping up everywhere. No, I think it's. I think now it's actually getting to the point where you need to be a little bit more critical.
Okay.
And figure out which one actually is the best content, and which one has, the more valuable information. So I think I think now, since there are so many options out there, it's like, okay, going into researching maybe the teachers and looking a little bit closer into what they have done, and I think it's more related towards that, because I've taken classes from all kinds of different platforms. And I think it really just, for me, I think it comes down to the point where the subject matter, mm-hmm. And then making a broad search, seeing what's out there, and then reading through the class description, making sure that covers all the things that you want to learn. But then I also research the teacher after that to make sure that I make the right decision, because generally there are always so many options out there. So I generally, usually I find myself going to like, that teacher does amazing work, or that artist does amazing work. I would like to learn from them, just to hear also like how they think and how they talk and everything. And then I sign up. That's usually how I sort of sort through the mountain of classes and available content and tutorials that are out there right now.
What was the, I think it's two classes that you took. What was the course that you did for the environment art course that got everything kind of kicking off for you? I think there was one course, I remember you said in one of your talks a while back.
Yeah, I took there was one I took with James Pegg.
Okay.
That was at Concept Design Academy. I took that class while I was still in school at Gnomon full time. So, I put in a lot of extra hours there. But he was great. This was more like, this was not a map painting class. It was more just an environment design, environment art class. And he's just a great teacher. He's just so relaxed and so fun to talk to. And he's got a great way of breaking it down. I think he now he has his own school now. I think it's called Brainstorm.
Brainstorm, right? Okay. I've never heard of
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, I think it's mostly, I think they don't do too many online classes. I think it's mostly like, in person. But yeah, he was just great. So I learned a lot from him about environment design, especially from him in that regard. He's great.
Because and then on top of that, I also remember. Did you also do an Unreal Engine one as well? Or
Yeah, and that
Yeah.
one was fantastic. That was at CGMA.
Okay,
So that was with Clinton Crumpler.
that name
And
rings a bell. I'm trying to remember. I remember the name. I remember the name.
yeah, oh my gosh, Clinton is fantastic. That was an awesome class. I pretty much learned everything about the game pipeline and how to, the differences between film and games. Everything in that class. It was 10 weeks. It was absolutely fantastic. It was great. Yeah, and he's an amazing teacher, does amazing work as well. He's just overall, that was a great class. I highly recommend it.
So, everyone who's tuning in, what I'll do is I'll make sure to put those links for these classes in the description below, so that nobody's missing out on anything. And as always, I always put the timestamps, so I'm going to be putting the timestamps for everything, so you guys know exactly what time of the podcast we had this discussion. So, carrying on the CGMA. So you're now an instructor at CGMA.
Yes,
So
I taught my first
congratulations.
class. Thank you.
So you're doing fundamentals of design.
I did that last year, yes. I haven't. I think I'm going to be doing something else again in April. I think I'm not sure yet. We haven't quite figured that out yet. But yes, potentially, hopefully, fingers crossed.
So what's it like being on the other side of things, doing the teaching?
Oh, it's great. It's a lot of fun because the students always challenge you. And it kind of, you have to realize things that you just sort of take for granted. You now have to explain. And that's you realize that's a whole different set of skills
Yeah.
that maybe you haven't quite practiced as much as before. So I really enjoy it. It's like they keep me on my toes, and I think it's great.
What would you say? Is there anything that's could have not could have what's kind of stood out to you through your time of teaching that's been the main kind of obviously you're saying you they always keep you on your feet, etc. Is there any main kind of teaching things that you've learned through your teaching, etc.? Is anything that really stood out to you in terms of how to be better at teaching?
Well, I think the realization that everybody learns differently.
Okay.
And that's something that you can't obviously really prepare for because it's just, every student is very different and how they learn is very different. And what techniques work for one person, they may not work for another person. So it's sort of trying to really work together with that person to figure out what works for them specifically. And that's something, again, I don't think it's something you can prepare for. It's just something that you kind of develop as you get to know the student, as you talk to them. It's just something you make different suggestions and how they can tackle certain problems and what they're struggling with, sort of identifying that and then helping them, giving them different options and different tools to work with.
Yeah, that's awesome. As always, folks, I'll make sure to put the CGMA link in the description as well, because we've actually had. Have you ever heard of Bobby Rebels before?
I have not. No, I've not.
We had another. He's also an instructor at CGMA. He did a character creature concept course for them, and we also had him on. And a lot of people in the comments were talking about CGMA and how good it is. So everyone, if you've never heard of CGMA, it's a great place for everyone to utilize. There's also a great Facebook page as well for everyone to make the most of in terms of all their announcements, all the news, etc. So if you're wanting to check out schools, because I actually got sent a message on LinkedIn a while back. It was actually a question that kind of put me on the spot. It was I've never been asked it before. It was somebody asked me what's the best schools to go in Europe, and I was like, I've only been to one school, and I was like, I don't know. Because there's so many that's the hard thing about it is it's exactly what you just said a few minutes ago. Is there's so many things out there, and it's so hard to kind of break things down. The one thing though I will say though, when it comes to finding the right course, as always, so the Student Art podcast is sponsored by the Rookies, and the Rookies actually got a breakdown of all the schools that they recommend based off all their discussions through their talks and through their school themselves. So if you are trying to figure out what is the best course for you, check out, it's literally, I'll put the link actually, make it easier for you. Once again, lots of links today, so be prepared. So I'll put that in the description below. Right, so there's, once again, on the Short podcast, one of the things I like to talk about is like the benefits of going to university, etc. But to kind of like change it a wee bit, because as always, like, there's so many things that kind of stand out. Is there any things? Well, actually, we'll start off with that. We'll keep it simple first. What would like the core things that you learned through studying at university?
Core things I learned.
Because I know you did photography, so photography was like a passion of yours.
Yes, it was also, and then film school as well. Honestly, it was about directing the viewer's eye through a piece, whether it's a moving shot or a still frame. I think just directing the viewer and what kind of techniques you can use for that.
Okay. So, like,
So I think,
that was the main things that kind of like stood out to you in terms of storytelling.
yeah, and I think that's something that actually is still the most beneficial and most applicable of what I'm doing today.
Okay. Do you think most people these days struggle with the storytelling aspect in regards to, like, say, students these days? Do you think they are still a bit behind in terms of creating a good story?
Yes, I think so. At least what I usually see, it's very much on the, it's coming down to the fun again, to the core of what you're trying to do with art. What you're trying to do, and how to be a good artist and how to be a good storyteller. Because if whether you work in film, whether you work in whatever it is that you're doing, you're always trying. There's a purpose. There's a purpose to this shot. There's a purpose to this environment that you're building, and figuring out what that purpose is, whether that's to tell a specific story point or set a certain mood, or whatever it is, whatever to give the viewer a certain feeling. You need to identify that purpose, and then you can really hone in on that, and you can really craft the shot to support its purpose. And I think a lot of times, especially with students, they just want to create something cool, which of course that's awesome and that's great.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying don't do that. I'm just saying dig a little bit deeper. Don't just give me a sci-fi hallway. Maybe tell me what happened in this hallway. What kind of hallway is it?
Yeah.
Is this a happy environment? Is this a happy world? Or, is the world on fire? There's so many more things you can add to just a sci-fi hallway. It doesn't just have to be that. You can go deeper. You can do a lot more to it. And I think that's, if once you start doing that, you really separate yourself out from the rest of the people, because a lot of people don't do that.
Yeah. Like I'll admit, so I'm a culprit. I'll be straight to the point. I've always honest. Like, I've always been like, when it comes to my artwork, obviously. So I've always done sci-fi kind of large scale environments, or like ornate artwork, and that's always been my kind of two kind of go to kind of things. And then at the moment I'm just doing animal art. But the one thing though I always realised though is like, it's literally like you said, it's about trying to separate yourself from others and trying to figure out how to stand out. Maybe it's presentation, maybe it's maybe doing like a fly through or something, and like you said, when it comes to creating a story, trying to make something feel immersive. Like when it comes to like the story side of things, is there any kind of tips you would kind of give to students in regards to maybe how can I say it, present themselves better in regards to, like, do you think a showreel is a better way to go in terms of like video, maybe doing a fly through, or do you think having like all the images on ArtStation, etc., is probably just a better way to present yourself?
I think I don't think you necessarily need a show reel unless you want to go into animation. Then obviously you need to show motion. But I think still images are perfectly fine. Especially recruiters they get so many reels and so many applications. Just sending them a quick link on ArtStation, they know how to use that.
Yeah.
It's a lot quicker for them, and they generally welcome that. So I would say that's still images is fine. I think presentation is a big one, and you mentioned that already. A lot of people forget about presentation. It's not just, not just don't just give me a folder of JPEG images.
Yeah.
Make it a little bit nicer. Maybe put it into a PDF, make a presentation out of it. There's so many different things you can do, and that already shows that you're professional and you understand presentation. And that's all. That's at the end of the day, that's what we do. It's part of marketing. It's everybody deals with that.
Definitely. Like, continuing like that kind of theme. Like, there's one thing that I've not seen a lot of. I've only seen a few people do it. I might be like, you may disagree with me, but so recently one of my friends who came on the podcast, Peter, he did a collaboration piece with another artist. So Peter's a lighting artist, and he did a collaboration piece with somebody who is like an environment artist. And like, what's your thoughts on people actually doing collaborations? Do you think we should start seeing more students actually working together? Like, obviously, as long as they kind of show that they like what work they did and they prove it, etc. But what's your thoughts on having that on your portfolio?
Oh, I think that would be awesome, as long as you obviously specify that, and you highlight the areas that you're responsible for. But I think that's great, and I think more people should do that, because that's how you present. That's how you can present the best work. Yeah. And that's really, and that's what counts. That's really what's important. So if you're not a great modeler, don't focus on that. Don't waste your time on that. If you want to be a lighter, focus on your lighting. And especially for lighters, because I get that question from lighters a lot. It's like, just take a scene that somebody else modeled. Just take it. It doesn't even have to be textured, but just use lighting to show different setups on it. Show how you can change the mood just through the lighting without taking any of the other things into consideration. And I think that's seeing more reels like that, and especially like collaboration. I think it's amazing. You should do that, definitely, because when you get to work, very rarely will you be the only artist working on a single shot. Mm-hmm. Obviously, I come from a background where actually that has been the case, but usually you're always in a pipeline. You're always working with different people. The more you can show that you can work together with other people, the better off you're going to be.
Yeah, because like that's the thing. Because when I saw one of the work that you did, so you said that the project you were working on was Tomorrowland.
Oh yeah.
And I was like, oh my lord. I was wondering what you were going to say. So you showed the show reel. I was like, what part of this environment did you make? I'm trying to figure out what you're going to. And then you said you did everything. Like, you did all the assets. The word you were using was assetizing. And yes. I was just shook. I was like, oh my god, that's so much work.
Yeah, well, I mean, basically what I did on it, so the whole city of Tomorrowland, it had to all get into our system and into our pipeline. So I had to literally go through and name every single asset and figure out, basically I did city planning, but in 3D. So I took our entire city and I broke it down into sections, and then the buildings in those sections had to get put into our pipeline, had to be given a name, and all of that. That was I did some city planning pretty much.
That was incredible. Like, speaking of like projects, do you have you had a personal favorite?
I know, because they're all so different, and they're all really, really exciting and challenging in different ways. Mm-hmm. I do have like maybe like 3 favorites.
Okay.
Sort of, for very different reasons actually. So one of them was Carne Y Arena, and that was a VR project. It was a VR experience, I should say, and it was directed by Alejandro Inarritu. And I apologize for my terrible American accent, but there you go. And that was the director of the Revenant.
Oh wow! Right. Okay.
Yes, and it was basically it was about I think it was 10 minutes. I don't exactly remember how long the experience was, but it was basically an experience of illegal Mexican immigrants crossing the border, and then getting caught by border patrol.
Yeah.
It was it was VR. It was we did it at ILMxLab, and it was just an incredible experience, because we were telling real people's stories, and we just wanted to do them justice as best as we could. this was a emotional project. It was a passion project
Yeah.
for Alejandro and like everybody involved, and for us as well. Because like I said, this was a very it's an emotional subject. It's not something that you experience very often.
Did that
So
one get an Oscar? I think you
it,
said something about there was an Oscar as well.
yes, it
Yeah.
did.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
amazing.
And for us, I mean, this was my first. I had literally just finished taking the Unreal class, so this was my first project in
Really?
Unreal.
Oh my gosh. Right, okay.
Uh-huh. And we were going for photorealism, with 10 fully animated characters with a helicopter and, just dust and particles and, I mean, and this in VR, obviously, when it has to run at 60 frames per second, or you get motion sick from it.
Oh
So
wow.
it was incredibly challenging, but just seeing like Alejandro react to it when he went through it, seeing just or hearing how the reaction from people when they went through the experience, that was just incredible. It was just people would fall down on the ground crying with their hands in the air. Like it was really I don't know, it was really emotional, and it was really gratifying,
Yeah.
to see that reaction, because we just really felt like we created something like an immersive story, and I think that was pretty awesome. That was pretty special.
Yeah. No, that's incredible. Because like that's the thing at the end of the day. It's like when you make a piece of art and you can connect with an audience, it's like there's nothing more rewarding. Like obviously at the end of the day, it's great. Like we were saying, it's great to make like pretty pictures and making something like appealing and stuff. But to actually capture or like to actually connect with someone's emotions and to get like we were talking about story, like it's so impactful and it goes such a long way. Like that's why it's always great when you see just like that iconic or not iconic, but that's something that's so fresh and unique. And like that's like the main reason it got an Oscar as well. It's like it was just different. It was a great story to talk about, and once again, like you said, it was a true story. And like maybe that might be the thing. Like if you guys are listening in and you're trying to figure out maybe how to make like people always like to look for something that makes them look different. Maybe try something that is a true story. Like you never know. Try and think that makes someone relate to like how can I say like relatability. Like it's such a powerful thing because at the end of the day like personally like the biggest example I always go back to it's just because I'm a massive fan of it. It's Harry Potter. Like I think so many people loved Harry Potter was because at the end of the day a lot of people could relate to his kind of teenage like being a kid and stuff. And like there's so many like great films out there that get that connection just perfect. And then like the other half of films a lot of people struggle with is that they kind of do the story all wrong and they have a pure story, therefore it instantly loses its impact and it just comes across as if it's just being made for art, if that makes sense. And it's like it's just trying to get that healthy balance and trying to be like if you're trying to figure out something, maybe give a true story a go. You never know.